Let's talk about customer first. And why are we talking about customer first? Well, because they are the most important part of your marketing plan. As you've heard that old saying, you can build the world's best mousetrap, but if you have no customers for it, it doesn't matter. But before you can actually find your customer, you have to define your customer. Who precisely are you going to be selling your product or service to? Who is your core customer? Imagine we were doing archery, and in the very middle, we have the bullseye of the circle. You want to decide who specifically are you trying to help, and what is their number one problem. So let's say, for example, that you were going to open a hair salon. Now, a common mistake that many small business owners make is that they want to have everybody as their clientele because they think if I target a wide range of people, then I'm more likely to sell to more people. Well, it may make sense intuitively, but it actually isn't the way that it works when it comes to marketing and sales. You're actually better off going after a really small bullseye, a small core customer, in order to be more successful. And that's because it takes time, money, and resources to really do marketing successfully. So the more focused you are going after one particular customer target, the more likely you are to understand them really, really well, and then market to them really, really well, and then to sell really well. So for example, going back to the hair salon, let's say you decide I'm going to only target women. Well, now that's only 50% of your marketing time, money, and effort will have to be spent looking at women. But is there a particular type of female that you'll be targeting? Are you looking at women of all ages? Or maybe it's women who are older. Maybe it's women who are younger. Maybe women who are of different ethnicities. Maybe women with long hair versus short hair. There actually are different ways that you can target and sub-target your core customer to really understand what is their number one problem. And the way you can define this is by actually talking, interviewing, and surveying your potential target to make sure that you understand what their number one problem is. Another trick that I use to understand my consumer or my customer is to understand 3 C's. And the 3 C's are defined as car, sell, and coffee. Once I know these 3 things about someone, I have a pretty good sense of what kind of personality they have. Now, undeniably, some of these things might sound like we're stereotyping people, and that probably could be said to some degree. But a little known fact about marketing and marketers is that that's what they do for a living. They really do stereotype people, but they don't call it stereotyping because that often has negative connotations. What they do is they call it fancy things like segmentation or cohort analysis or personas or profiles. Those are all equally valid terms, but between you and I, sometimes they can verge on stereotyping. So whatever you need to do to make a more successful customer profile, that is the way to go. And as I mentioned, car, sell, and coffee really help define someone. If someone chooses an Apple only, that tells you something about what they prioritize. Car is a great example. After your purchase of your home, if you're fortunate enough to have a condo or a house, a car is probably the second most expensive item you'll ever buy. So it says a lot about you. It's a status symbol. Some would jokingly say it's a chick magnet, or they might jokingly say it's a midlife crisis car. You probably have heard those statements before in those terms. Well, a car really says a lot about you. If you choose to drive a Mercedes as opposed to a Toyota Prius, that says something to everyone else as well. So think about those 3 things when you're defining your customer profile. If we were to look a little bit deeper into what your customer wants, we could actually look at all the value statements that are important to them. And by value statements, I mean, how does your customer define value? Are they looking to save time, to save money? The top 3 usually for most people are time, money, and effort because you can't buy more time, and nobody wants to put in a lot of effort more than they have to. And money, of course, it's something that is a finite resource. So if your product or service will help people save time, money, or effort, you're already halfway home. But there are other elements that are quite different, but may be equally important depending on what you're selling. For example, we talked about cars earlier on. Well, for many people, a car is also a status symbol. It's not just a product that gets you from A to B. There are lots of ways to get from A to B. A car really says something about you. It is a status symbol for some people. We talked about the hair salon. Well, that gets to aesthetics. Again, if you want your hair cut, there are lots of different options in the marketplace. Why does someone pay $15 for a haircut as opposed to $150 for a haircut? That could be aesthetics. So again, when you understand what's really important to your customer, then you really are better able to market to them. Here are some more examples of what I mean by customer values and some insights. So for a few years, I worked on the brand Dove, a very famous brand globally. And what Dove did internationally, they did research to understand how do women feel about themselves and their bodies, because Dove sells beauty care products. And a really interesting revelation, it was actually a fairly sad revelation, is that most women feel really insecure and ugly about their body, especially young girls. They're very vulnerable. So Dove took this insight and they found a way to actually package their brand, to market their brand in such a way that they really communicated with women on their own terms. That's why in all Dove advertising, they use real women. They really are an open casting call. They are not models. They are not airbrushed. That was really important to have authenticity in order to talk to women on their own terms about a very emotionally important topic to them. Another brand that I worked on is called Sunsilk. This had been a $17 million launch into the Canadian marketplace. And they really had to understand what is most important to young women when it comes to their hair. And it was determined that one of the most um, emotionally fraught times to have a bad hair day would be on the day of your wedding. I actually had a fairly bad hair day in my wedding, so I know a little bit what this is about. This may sound silly if you don't understand, this insight, and that's okay. Maybe you're a male, maybe you're older, maybe you're a female, but still don't understand it. That's okay. What's most important is that if this is your target consumer, you need to understand them. It's not so much about what do I understand, but what does your target audience understand? What do they think? How do they feel? So having a bad hair day, research showed, was actually really upsetting to young women who were 18 to 25, to the point where they actually wouldn't go to school or to college or to work because of a bad hair day. It might sound crazy, but that's what the research proved. So if you are going back to that hair salon or a hair care product, if that's who you're targeting, you really need to understand that in order to have an emotional connection with that customer. This last example is applicable if you are a contractor, maybe a plumber or a builder. It's all about homeowners and how they define their home. It's their castle, it's their safe place. So if I'm going to allow you into my house to do any work in my house, I have to really trust you. And this insight is really important because if you are that contractor trying to win someone's business, understanding this insight and marketing yourself as someone who understands this insight and will reassure people can really make the difference between winning the business and not winning the business. And as a personal anecdote, we recently had a very minor contract job in our house. And guess what? We had a theft afterwards. We had something go missing in our house. And I was pretty sure I knew it was when one of the contractors was here. Well, that was really upsetting to my family. But as you can imagine, because it was so upsetting, I would really make sure the next time we hired a contractor, having a sense of security, someone who's trustworthy, that might be more important than just the price or the fancy design or the blueprint. So they're just things to think about when you market yourself to potential buyers. And like we said for online dating, when you understand their innermost thoughts, you can try to connect with them on a deeper level. So let's actually give some examples of how you define your customer. Let's go back to the hair salon example. Let's men and women, Or maybe we've decided our hair salon will target women only. But then we might actually go further and say, is it women who have short hair or women who have curly hair? I've actually gone to a curly hair salon before, so I can definitely say I have done both of these hair salons in my time. Or maybe you decide neither. Maybe you only want to go after the youth market and have a kid-based salon. So once again, we've talked about how there's so many different customers that may make up your desired audience. You are better off choosing one small niche, one small element of the bigger population and defining them as your customer to market to. Here's another example. This is a brand that I actually worked on. I helped create their marketing plan for them. So it was an existing product called Naturaz. They are a natural hair care product targeting women of African American descent. So basically, women, Black women with their specific Black hair care needs. Now, as a sidebar, you may be saying to yourself, this example is not applicable to me. I don't have a product, or I don't care about hair care products, or I'm not Black, or I don't even have any hair. That's all totally fine. The point of this example is to say, if you get this example and you are not the target audience, even better. Then you'll definitely understand it when it comes to your brand or your product or service. If you can understand something that's outside of your framework, you'll definitely understand how to apply the same principles to your particular product or service. So this is how Natraz used to look. This is their former website and their packaging, their bottles. And one of the first things that I did for them was to design a customer profile. We've talked about this already, but this really gets down to the 360-degree profile of who are they? What do they do? What do they like? How do they live? How do they spend their money, their time, etc.? And what's very important as a marketer is to know what are their media habits. And that's a fancy way of saying, how do they spend their free time? What do they read? What do they watch? How do they spend their time online? What are their favorite sites? Because if you are going to be talking to them about your brand, your product, your service, you want to know where they currently are, what they like, how they spend their time, because that's a chance for you to go and to insert your brand into those media opportunities. In regards to understanding the African American consumer, the Black consumer, there is a lot of research online. It wasn't too hard to find it. That's not going to be the case for every brand. Sometimes you might have more challenges. If you're a contractor, for example, you might not be able to necessarily find this type of information online, but you can still do surveys, talk to people, even talking to friends and family and people in your network. You can really get some really interesting information about what's important to them and what they value. How do they hire a contractor? Is it just word of mouth? Are they going through websites? Are review websites important? Get a really, really rich knowledge of how they go through the buying behavior process. So here's another example if you're a service provider. Supposing, for example, you are a yoga instructor and you have to decide who your ideal consumer is. Who's your ideal target? Well, there are a lot of people you could target your services to. Think of it in terms of a really broad range, and then decide who are you most qualified to help and why, and then where also is the biggest market opportunity. So I think when people think of yoga studio, they probably think the conventional customer is a younger client, the 25 to 28-year-old female. It's sort of like the Gwyneth Paltrow image that you may have in your head. And that can definitely be undeniably a big audience for yoga. But think about other people who might also appreciate and enjoy yoga services. Maybe it's older clients, such as retired women. Maybe it's kids. I've actually brought my kids to some yoga classes. Maybe it's pregnant women. I also did yoga when I was pregnant because I was told it would help out with the natural pregnancy. I don't know if it really did in the end, but anyway, I did that for quite a few months. Moms and babies and kids. As mentioned, I have done that. Long distance runners. Wow. Once again, I did yoga because I was a marathoner and I was told if you did yoga, it would help prevent injury. Because truthfully, I'm not a Gwyneth Paltrow type. I'm really a running type. I like really aggressive sports. But I did do yoga for that particular reason because it would help me with my running. So you may not think of that as the conventional yoga service, but it obviously did exist and it could be a niche opportunity for you. Maybe you will do yoga just for rehab patients or people with back pain. I've been told that yoga is also really helpful if you have chronic back pain. So from some from one very simple description, I'm a yoga instructor. We have 7 or 8 different ways you could take your service and target it to different types of clientele. So I would encourage you, whatever your niche is, whatever your service is, think about who you can target. This was the end of our customer section. I encourage you now to pull out your one-page marketing and sales plan and fill out this section before we move on to section 2, which is competition and industry. So for my customer, think about your customer segment and profile. Who is your core customer? Describe them in terms of the demographics. That's their age, their gender, their income, their education, rural, urban, where do they live, things like that. Also, their psychographic. So, what are their values? What do they believe? Are they conservative? Are they more liberal? Are they young, funky, hip, or again a little bit more traditional? Think about their lifestyle. How do they spend their free time? Their hobbies? What are their digital habits? Because digital marketing is increasingly important, think about how they spend their time online. What sites are they on? Um, for some women, for example, they may like celebrity gossip sites. That's really important to know if you want to target young women. You may also have a secondary customer. So going back to the bullseye, our core customer is that dot right in the middle of the bullseye, but it's totally feasible to have a second audience because sometimes you want to very carefully target more than one customer. Who is that secondary customer? And most importantly, what is your customer's problem? What do they need to do? What is their biggest problem to fix or their desire? So going back to the yoga instructor, depending on who you target, you could have a very different problem. If your audience is a younger female, she might do yoga for stress release, for exercise, for weight loss, for overall physical well-being. However, if you're targeting the pregnant mom, she might have a very different motivation. My need at the time was I want to have a less painful natural pregnancy. Similarly, if you're targeting people who are doing yoga for chronic pain, for back pain, they have a very different motivation. So factor these into your customer section, and then we'll move on to section 2, which is competition and industry.